Welcome back to the Relationships Made Simple for Men podcast with me, Bryce Bauer. I'm a men's coach and marriage counselor. Today, I'm going to be talking about 5 signs of toxic masculinity. And this word had a lot of buzz a few years ago. I haven't heard it used as much, and there were different opinions on the topic. And I want to give you mine because people can make a good argument for why those two words should not be coupled together, or they can have issues with how it's talked about. But there is something real underneath that we're trying to find language for. There are ways that men show up in the world, and it is toxic to relationships and family systems and workplace environments. And women have their stuff too, but there are specific behaviors that seem more unique to men. And I can see that this comes about through our evolution and years of conditioning. And it's 2025 now. So we can talk about it and we can change it. We have the skills to confront it. And even just being a man who's open to hearing other people's opinions and concerns and feelings is a really big deal. And we need more of you, which brings me to my first sign of toxic masculinity, which is defensiveness around talking about the topic at all. It's like a shield, and anything that goes near it, it gets deflected back and posed as a problem that you're having. And there is no curiosity, no compassion, and frankly, no open-mindedness at all that there's any systemic issue here. It gets taken personally immediately. And as part of my research, I'm actually a part of several really large men's groups on Facebook. And I don't really post in there, but I like to read the comments because I'm curious about how men are thinking about things. And there have been a couple of posts in the last year where someone asks about toxic masculinity, and it got hundreds of comments, maybe even thousands. And I was really surprised at how this created an echo chamber of grievances. And the story was that men are so hated. They're so bad. Men need to get more credit. This is all made up. It's just a bunch of bullshit. And I was surprised because I'm a man, a white man, very generic looking in a lot of ways. I always look like somebody's friend when I go places. I look masculine. I sound masculine. And I just don't seem to experience much judgment. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't feel like hated when I go out into the world. In fact, I can see ways in which I'm treated with privilege because I look like everyone else. I live in a very white community. And when I hear people say things about men in general, or I read things online about men's bad behavior, individuals, or when it's pointed out that men tend to be in control more often in large companies and in churches or in government, I try to see it for what it is. That there's truth to a lot of that. And I can see why my wife is afraid to go walking in our really safe neighborhood at night and why I'm not. It's something that she feels in her body. It's just the reality that even though it's still a small chance, there is a chance that there are men in the world that would want to harm her. And I just don't feel that. Men commit a vast majority of the violent crimes, and that's always been the case. And obviously, that's the most extreme toxic version of men doing bad things. But I don't want to miss the examples of more subtle ways in which men can be toxic or I can be toxic. And we can use different words like misattuned or unaware or controlling or dominating. I don't have a problem putting those in the same box and calling them toxic traits. So anyone who has complete resistance to even talking about this topic, that alone, I think, becomes a toxic trait because it's a way to control the conversation, to dismiss any concerns, and to make this conversation taboo and protect it from criticism. And I know that, criticism gets a bad name as something that you don't ever want to do to other people. It has a negative connotation, but we need criticism in order to grow and learn. and have stuff pointed out to us. The longer I've been on this journey, I'm like, yeah, bring it on. Bring on the criticism. It doesn't mean I have to take all of it, but I want to pay attention to it. If enough people are talking about it, or I'm getting the same feedback from people, it's worth paying attention to. And if you feel secure in yourself in how you're behaving in your relationships and the world, it shouldn't be triggering to talk about toxic masculinity, even if you don't agree with the title. So that's the first sign. The second sign of toxic masculinity is emotional suppression. And men are really good at this. And I have a soft spot for men and the reality that most of us were not taught how to be emotionally expressive and vulnerable in the world and to be received in a way that supports it, especially with other men. For some people, it was beaten out of them, literally, by their dad or their parents or on the playground or in the workplace. The message was clear. We don't do that here. You'll get made fun of. And it's the water that a lot of men swim in. There's a hierarchy of control and toughness, not in all groups, but in a lot of groups and cultures. And if you know a man or you're with a man who doesn't show any emotion, who goes cold and stonewalls whenever there's conflict in the air, or who shuts down and doesn't talk, you know how distressing this can be in a relationship. Some of you may have seen the still face experiment. And if you haven't, just put it into YouTube, still face experiment. You can watch it. But essentially what they did is they brought a mother and her young baby that's about 1 year old into a room, and they had the mother interacting with the baby. And then they asked the mother to just go still, just straight face, and to see how the baby would respond. And it was so interesting and also sad to watch this baby start to try to engage with the mother, make sounds, move their hands and body. And within a few seconds, after not getting anything back from the mother, the baby starts to get distressed and starts to cry. And the thing to take from this is that even though we're not babies anymore, we're still wired in the same way. When we're trying to engage with someone emotionally and we're reading their face and body language and their tone, and we get like nothing back or monotone, and we don't know what's going on for them, and they don't seem to have any care coming towards us, it can be really distressing. So that's the major downside of putting on this stoic face or going numb or shutting down when we're trying to work something out, when our partner is bringing concerns to us or wants to engage emotionally. Emotional suppression is a silent killer of relationships. The third sign of toxic masculinity is dominance and control. So this can look like always needing to be right, being in charge of all the finances or not having transparency there if you're married, creating a culture where what you say is what goes. You override your wife or you just dominate your kids into submission. And this is really an energy that some men carry. They're in control. They can get big, dominate conversations, manipulate people into doing what they want. Some men might never really get much feedback or have to face this head on because they are the head of their company or the head of the household and no one ever pushes back. So this is something we constantly have to check in with in ourselves. And one thing that we can do to combat this is to just acknowledge when we're wrong or to ask questions about how someone feels with us and just listen to them. What do they think about our power dynamics? And you will see some men that a lot of people look up to never do this. I'm thinking about one person in particular, our president currently. That dude has never admitted being wrong ever in his life. And no matter where you land on politics, I don't think anyone can argue that this guy is not a complete narcissist. And as I go through the list of toxic traits, he checks all the boxes. So when you're looking for someone to follow, I highly suggest finding someone who sometimes admits that they're wrong or that they have more to learn in an area. This way you don't get swindled into believing that it's possible to be right about everything all the time. The fourth sign of toxic masculinity is misogyny and what I will call homosexual insensitivity. Some people call this homophobia, but I don't like that term because that implies that there's a fear of people being homosexual. And I don't think that's it. This is more a lack of awareness and an insensitivity. So it's people that make jokes about being gay, jab at their friends, make homosexual remarks. It's really a collection of qualities that are more feminine that we put below the masculine qualities, which at its root really is what toxic masculinity is. It's looking at masculine traits is much more valuable than feminine traits, and then taking them to the extreme while limiting feminine traits. But to be a well-rounded human being in this world, whether you're a man or a woman, you can balance both. And it doesn't mean that you won't play out different roles in your relationship. Like I'm more of a masculine man, and Jenny, my wife, is a feminine woman. And so I open the jars. I do a lot of our planning. I would protect her if someone came and was coming at us. But that doesn't mean that that's more important than the way that she brings care and softness and attention into the home space and into our relationship. And that's an area where I really try to show up and meet her there. And she also accomplishes a lot of things. I mean, she's been a small business owner for almost 20 years. She knows how to take care of herself. She's an independent woman. She can hold her ground in a conversation. She does speak up. And we're always trying to balance our ways of being here and to show up more fully to support each other in all of our traits. And coming back to the insensitivity, as a young person, I can't tell you how many times I either used a homosexual slur or heard one from my friends. It was part of our culture and our language, and I cringe when I think about that. I don't even want to repeat some of the things I used to say, but you can use your imagination. We were always coming up with creative digs for each other that had a homosexual manner to them. Nowadays, I don't find any of that funny, and not because I'm just super tight and rigid and don't have a sense of humor. I just see it for what it is. There are plenty of ways that I can be playful with people and even mimic them or mock them. I'm sometimes pretty good at that without putting other people down. And coming around to the point of misogyny, for those of you that don't know the definition, it's the idea that males are superior to women. If you want something to get done, give it to a man. Men should be in leadership positions. Women are too weak. Men should be the leaders of the home, of the organization, of the churches, of everything. Women should just stay in their lane and shut up and do what they're told. And I know for me, I've had blind spots here where I've believed that at times. And there are ways that you can make a logical case for that. But you can really make a case for anything. But if you want to have real intimacy in your relationships, there has to be equality. That is one thing that I am very sure of at this point in my career working with couples, is that in order to have a deeply fulfilling relationship, we have to see each other as equals and share in the decision-making process and both engage in the repair process and both show up emotionally. It really has to be on par. So I could give you more examples of misogyny, but you can look into it more if you want to. The fifth sign of toxic masculinity that I want to mention, I know I might get some pushback here, is risk taking to prove toughness. And I've added to prove toughness to this sign because I know that some men enjoy doing things that are a little bit more risky. And it's really because they like doing it. But there are also ways in which men are trying to really create this identity of the tough guy, the risk taker, show that they're fearless. And it's really to heal something inside of them. It's more of an act. It's something they want to show to the world, to prove themselves because they feel insecure in here. And they were put down so many times and told that they were less than or weak or too sensitive, that their mission in life is to prove that wrong, to disown that part of themselves, hide that part of themselves. And they mask that by trying to show the world that they're tough. And this can be more extreme or it can be more subtle. For instance, I've realized that when I walked into an MMA gym at 19, I was feeling pretty insignificant in my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was feeling pretty anxious. I was trying to find myself. And so the idea of stepping into a cage and being on a stage with hundreds of people watching and me trying to beat someone up, that was appealing. Like if I can do that, that'll really help me feel more confident and that will earn respect from people in the world. And I will feel some sense of significance. That's not the only reason that I did it. I genuinely liked the sport. I grew up wrestling and doing karate and playing football. So physical contact was pretty normal for me. And I did well in the sport as an amateur. I fought for about 7 years. I had 9 amateur fights. But towards the end of my fighting, I started to realize that maybe I was actually doing this to try to prove something, and not so much because I actually wanted to. I had dealt with some pretty bad injuries in practice. I'm really putting my whole body on the line during a fight, and the chances of getting hurt are near 100%, at least a little bit. And it just stopped making as much sense to me. And I did get my ass kicked in my last fight, and my wife was there. We had just been dating for a few months at the time. She had watched me win a fight, which was awesome. I mean, I still had to get stitches, but when she came to my last fight and I got kicked in the head and had a headache, maybe a concussion, I don't know. And she was like, I don't want to watch you do this anymore. A light bulb went off and I was like, oh, why am I doing this? And it clicked that at that point, I was probably doing it more because I wanted to be seen a certain way than I was because I really wanted to keep doing this sport and competing. So that's for each man to assess within himself. Are you doing these activities because you genuinely like them and you are okay with the risk? Or are you doing them to prove something to the world? And have you actually taken a honest look at the risk and thought about how that might impact people in your life? That's another thing to factor in. So going into a review of the 5 signs of toxic masculinity, I have 1, you get defensive around the topic itself. 2, you suppress your emotions. 3, you exert dominance and control over people in your life. 4, misogyny and homosexual insensitivity. And 5, risk taking to prove your toughness. So I hope this was helpful today and enlightening. Maybe you can see some of this in yourself. Maybe you see it out in the world. You might even be a victim of toxic masculinity. Many men are. And if you want to be with a group of like-minded people, or you need support in your marriage or individually, you can go to my website at www.bricebauer.com. That's all I got for today. Peace.